I was 40 seconds into my wedding vows when my mother stood up. Not the stumble of someone unwell, not the confused, half-risen movement of a person who has been overcome by emotion and cannot quite stay seated. The deliberate, prepared rise of someone who has chosen this moment with care and has been waiting for it since she sat down. She stood the way she stands when she has decided something, fully, completely, with her shoulders back and her chin level, and the specific quality of stillness that in my mother has always preceded something she believes will not be argued with. I was holding Declan's hands at the altar. The string quartet had gone silent for the vows, the way they had been asked to go silent. 300 guests were in the chapel, a stone building on the edge of Calder Bluff that had been holding occasions like this for 120 years, and that smelled of old wood and candle wax, and the particular accumulated warmth of every gathering it had ever contained. The flowers were exactly what I had chosen. The light through the tall windows was the amber light of late afternoon in early October. Everything was exactly as I had imagined it. And then my mother stood up. She pointed at Declan. She said, and her voice carried in that stone chapel the way voices carry in old stone buildings, amplified and clarified, every syllable arriving at every person in every pew without any effort on the speaker's part. She said, "She has been lying to you her whole life. This wedding should not happen. This man deserves to know the truth about who he is marrying." In the third row, my sister Petra began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, the kind of clapping that is not enthusiasm but punctuation. Two relatives behind her joined, briefly, with the uncertain look of people who have been prepared to do this and are now doing it and are not entirely sure anymore that they should be. 300 people froze. The minister, a man of perhaps 60 who had conducted weddings for 30 years and had clearly never been in this particular position, stood at the altar with his order of service in hand and the specific expression of someone who has encountered a situation for which no training exists. The string quartet did not move. The flowers did not move. 300 people suspended somewhere between their last breath and their next one, in the specific suspended state of a room that has just had something unexpected enter it and has not yet decided how to respond. I did not let go of Declan's hands. I want you to understand that. In the moment my mother stood up and said those words in front of every person we had invited to witness the beginning of our marriage, I did not let go of my husband's hands. I held them, and I looked at him, and he looked at me with the expression of someone who has been prepared for exactly this moment and is simply waiting for the right second to act. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He removed his phone. He found what he was looking for on the screen with one thumb, the way he does everything on his phone, efficiently, without looking away from what matters. He looked at my mother, who was still standing in the front pew, with her chin level and her shoulders back, and the expression of a woman who has just delivered the most important speech of her life and is waiting for its effect. He said, "Before you continue, I want to make sure everyone in this room hears the same version of the story you told me last Tuesday." He pressed play. "My name is Ren. I am 31 years old. And what came through the chapel speakers on the afternoon of my wedding is what I am going to tell you about. But first I need to take you back through the years that made that recording necessary. Back through the long, patient work of a woman who had been building a particular story about me since before I was old enough to know a story was being built. I want to ask you something before we begin. Have you ever had someone tell a story about you? Not once, not in a moment of anger, but consistently and carefully over many years, to many people, in many rooms you were never in. Have you ever understood, slowly and then all at once, that the version of you that exists in certain people's minds was authored by someone else and bears only a partial resemblance to who you actually are? Because that is what I grew up inside. and I want you to understand the full architecture of it before I tell you what Declan's phone contained. My mother, Iris Calloway, is one of the most socially accomplished people I have ever known. I say this not as a compliment, though it could be one. I say it as the most precise description I can offer of a quality that has shaped my entire life. She is extraordinary at managing how she is perceived. She knows, with what feels like an instinct, but is actually a refined and practiced skill, exactly what each person in a room needs to hear in order to like her, trust her, and feel that she is the most reasonable and devoted presence they have encountered that day. She has spent 58 years developing this skill, and she is very good at it. My father, Bernard, is a quieter instrument in the same orchestra. He is not the conductor. Iris conducts. He provides the harmony. He confirms her accounts. He nods at the right moments. He offers the second voice that makes a story from one person sound like a consensus from a family. He is not cruel in his own right. He is the specific kind of passive that makes cruelty possible by never introducing the friction that might stop it. I am the eldest of 2 daughters. My sister Petra arrived 4 years after me and found from her earliest awareness of the family's social landscape that the most efficient path through it was alignment with Iris.
This was not a cynical choice. Children do not make cynical choices. They make survival choices. And in the household we grew up in, the survival choice and the alignment choice were indistinguishable. Petra has never entirely separated them. She is 37 years old, and she is still making the alignment choice, as her clapping this afternoon demonstrated. The story my mother has told about me has several chapters and has been refined across years of telling. Its core is this: Ren is difficult. Ren has always had a tendency to dramatize. Ren's account of things should be received with a gentle sympathy and a private reservation, because Ren has a history of saying things that are not entirely accurate when it serves her. This story has been told at family gatherings, over phone calls, in the particular confidential register that Iris uses when she wants something to feel like a reluctant admission rather than a deliberate broadcast. It has been told so many times, in so many versions, to so many people, that it exists in our extended family as a kind of background radiation, present everywhere, generating a low-level doubt about everything I say, invisible to people who have not looked for it, but structuring the room whenever I enter it. I grew up knowing this without fully naming it. Children know the shape of the social world around them before they have language for it. I knew that when I reported things to adults, there was a moment, a brief, almost imperceptible pause, before the response came. I knew that certain relatives looked at me with a slight tilt of the head that I did not see when they looked at Petra. I knew that my mother's version of a story about me was always the version that traveled, while my version arrived later, if it arrived at all, into a room that had already been furnished with hers. I named it when I was 19. And the naming of it, the specific thing I said when I was 19, the thing Iris then used to build the central chapter of her story about me, is the thing I need to tell you about. Not in the detail that the original deserves, because some details belong to private grief and not to public story, but in the shape that is necessary to understand what happened in the chapel and why the recording contained what it contained. When I was 19, I told my family that my father had behaved inappropriately toward me. I want to be careful here because accurate language matters. I am not going to describe the incident itself. What I am going to describe is what happened after I reported it. Iris's response was immediate and total. She denied it. Not in the hesitant, conflicted way of someone who has received difficult information and does not know what to do with it. In the decisive, organized way of someone who has decided in the first 30 seconds what the correct response is and is implementing it. She told Bernard I was lying. She told her sister I was lying. She told anyone who received even a rumor of what I had said that I was lying, that I had fabricated the incident, that it had never happened, that I had a history of this kind of thing, and that this was the most significant evidence of it yet. And from that day forward, the incident became the keystone of the story.
Everything else, the small chapters, the individual instances of Ren is difficult and Ren exaggerates, was retroactively organized around this central fact. Here is a woman who made a false accusation against her own father. Everything she says must be understood in that context. I spent 12 years after that finding ways to function inside a family that had officially declared me a liar. I went to university. I built a career in architectural conservation, the work of understanding what buildings were before they were damaged and restoring them to something true. The irony of this is not lost on me. I built friendships outside the family. I found a life that existed in the space beyond Iris's orbit. And then I met Declan, and I brought him back into the orbit's edge, and Iris recognized him as the kind of person who would eventually see what she had built. And she decided to move before he could. I want to ask you something about those 12 years, about functioning inside a story about yourself that you know is wrong but cannot entirely disprove because the person who wrote it is also the person who controls the primary sources. Have you ever been in that position, where correcting the record requires you to argue against someone who is more trusted than you are, precisely because they have spent years making themselves more trusted than you? Where the very act of pushing back is read as confirmation of the story. Because that is the specific trap I lived in, and I want you to understand it before I tell you how Declan walked through it. Declan Marsh came into my life 3 years ago at a professional conference. He works in civil engineering, which meant our professional worlds orbited the same territory without previously intersecting. He is a careful observer of people. Not suspicious, not cynical, careful. He pays attention to the gap between what people say and how they say it, between the explicit content of a conversation and its emotional subtext. He noticed Iris within 2 meetings. He did not say anything immediately. He is not a man who speaks before he is certain, which is one of the things I loved about him early, and have loved more as I have watched it operate in more significant contexts. He watched. He listened to how Iris described me when I was not in the room. He noticed the warmth she directed at him and the particular quality of it, the warmth of someone who is investing in an audience rather than simply being warm. He noticed the stories she told and what was always at the center of them. A version of Ren that was slightly less than the Ren he was sitting across the dinner table from, slightly less reliable, slightly more prone to difficulty, slightly the kind of person a man might benefit from having independent confirmation about. 6 weeks before the wedding, things began to shift in a way I could feel, but could not yet specifically locate. Relatives who had been warm became slightly more measured. A cousin made a comment at a family dinner that arrived with a subtext I recognized but could not immediately trace. I felt the background radiation intensifying, that low-level doubt that had always been present becoming, in the weeks before the wedding, something more active and more urgent. Then Vera called. Vera is my great-aunt, my father's aunt, his mother's youngest sister, now 81 and living in a smaller town an hour from Calder Bluff. She has never been particularly close to Iris. She has the specific freedom of someone who is old enough and distant enough from the center of the family's social gravity to say things that other people in the family would not say. She called me on a Tuesday evening and said, "Ren, I want to tell you something because I think someone should, and I am old enough that I am past worrying about the consequences of being honest." She told me that Iris had been making calls, that the calls had been going to family members, to people who would be at the wedding, to people whose opinion Declan would encounter in the months after the wedding, if not before it. That the calls had contained a story, specifically the story about when I was 19. That Iris had been framing it as something Declan needed to know before he married me. That the implication of the calls was clear. A man about to make a serious commitment deserved to understand the kind of woman he was committing to. Vera said, "I do not know everything that happened when you were 19. I have my own thoughts about it that I have kept to myself for 12 years. But I know what Iris has been saying, and I know that what she is planning to do at that wedding is not protection of anyone. It is something else. I thought you should know." I thanked her. I sat with the call for an hour after it ended, and then I called Declan. I told him everything. All of it. The incident at 19, Iris's response, the 12 years of the story she had been telling, Vera's call, what Iris was planning. I told him in the specific, complete way I had never quite managed with anyone else, because with anyone else I had always been holding one thing back. One piece of the story too raw or too old or too shameful to give in full. With Declan, I gave it in full. And I waited. He listened to all of it. He did not speak until I had completely finished. And then he said two things. He said, "I believe you." And then he said, "I want us to be ready for whatever she is planning. Tell me what you need." I want to ask you something about those two sentences, about the specific experience of being believed, not conditionally, not with the slight qualification of someone managing their own uncertainty, but simply and completely believed by someone whose opinion matters to you. Have you ever experienced that? The specific weight of it? Because I had spent 12 years in a family system that had decided what the truth was, and I had spent those 12 years carrying my own version of events in a container that had no outside validation. Declan's "I believe you" was two words that arrived like light in a room that had been kept dark for a very long time. I want you to carry that with you into the next part of the story. Declan's idea was simple, as the most effective ideas tend to be. He said, "Your mother is planning to tell me something at the wedding, something she believes I do not yet know. What if I gave her the opportunity to tell me before the wedding, in a less public setting, and made sure I had a record of exactly what she said?" He called Iris. He framed it as exactly what it appeared to be on the surface: a prospective son-in-law wanting a conversation with his future mother-in-law before the wedding. He was warm. He was specific. He said there were things he wanted to understand about Wren's family history, things that would help him be the right kind of partner for her. He said he valued Iris's perspective. He said he wanted to hear from her directly. Iris agreed immediately. She agreed with the specific eagerness of someone who has been given an opening they have been waiting for. They met at a coffee shop on a Tuesday, a neutral public space, ordinary, the kind of place where the social performance required is low enough that people relax into saying things they might guard more carefully in a more formal setting. Bernard came with her. Declan came alone. His phone was in his shirt pocket. The recording application he had downloaded specifically for this purpose was running before he walked through the door. In the jurisdiction of Calder Bluff, recording a conversation in which you are a participant is entirely within a person's legal rights. Declan had confirmed this with a brief legal consultation before the meeting. He is an engineer. He does not act on assumptions when verification is available. The conversation lasted 23 minutes. I know this because I have listened to the recording several times since the wedding. Not obsessively, not in the way of someone searching for additional pain, but in the specific way of someone who needs to understand the full shape of something before they can begin to process it. 23 minutes in which Declan asked careful, warm, interested questions, and Iris answered them in the specific, flowing way that people answer questions when they have been waiting to be asked. She told him about when I was 19. She told him her version, the version in which I had fabricated the incident, in which I had made a false accusation against my own father out of a jealousy or a need for attention she had never been able to fully explain. She told him about the pattern she claimed to have observed across my life, the difficulty, the dramatization, the tendency to say things that were not accurate when accuracy did not serve me. She told him about the family's collective understanding of this pattern, as though the family's understanding were a fact rather than a narrative she had constructed and distributed. She told him all of this in the concerned, reluctant tone of a mother doing something painful, because love requires it. Bernard provided the confirming nods. Occasionally, he added a word or a phrase. Not much, because this was Iris's performance, and Bernard knew his role in it. But enough that his voice is clearly present in the recording, clearly confirming what Iris was saying. At no point did either of them indicate that this was a rehearsal for a public announcement. At no point did they mention that this conversation was designed as preparation for standing up at their daughter's wedding and making an accusation in front of 300 guests. They presented it as a private, difficult, reluctant disclosure, which was the performance, and which is exactly what the recording captured. Declan had also, in the 2 weeks between my full disclosure and the wedding, done something else. He had engaged a professional, a specialist in family dynamics and what the professional literature calls coercive control patterns, and had shared with her a detailed account of what I had described across our 3 years together. Not the incident itself, which was mine to disclose or not, the pattern around it, the family narrative, the reputation campaign, the years of consistent and coordinated doubt-seeding, the specific methods Iris used to position her account against mine. The professional had provided a written assessment. It was not a legal document. It was not a clinical diagnosis. It was a clear, evidenced description of a behavioral pattern that had a name in her field, and that fit what I had described with a specificity that, when I read it, made me sit in my kitchen for a long time without moving. And now you are at the moment that has been coming since I said the words she stood up. Before I take you back inside that chapel, if this story is reaching you, if you have ever had someone else's version of you travel further than your own, please subscribe to this channel. Every week there is a story like this one, completely free, and it takes 1 second to subscribe.
Now let me take you back to the altar and tell you what came out of those speakers. But first I want to ask you this. When Declan reached into his pocket at the altar, when he took out his phone in front of 300 people and looked at my mother and said those words before pressing play, what do you think he was feeling? Because I have asked him this since, and his answer was not what I expected. He said he was not angry. He said he was sad. He said he was sad because the woman standing in that pew was the mother of the person he loved most in the world, and that watching what she had built and what she was prepared to do with it made him grieve for the version of a mother she could have been. I want you to hold that. I think it is the most important thing in this story. The recording connected to the chapel's sound system through a Bluetooth pairing that Declan had arranged quietly with the venue coordinator 3 days before the wedding. I did not know about this. I knew about the recording. I did not know about the sound system arrangement, because Declan had made a decision that I needed plausible ignorance of the specific logistics. He did not explain this to me until afterward. He said, "I needed you to be completely yourself in that moment. If you had known exactly what was going to happen, it would have changed how you held yourself. I wanted her to see your face as it actually was." My face, when Iris stood up, was the face of someone who was not surprised. I had known something was coming. I had not known the precise moment or the precise form, but Vera's call had given me enough that the arrival of the thing, when it came, found me already braced. Not closed, braced. The way you brace for weather you have been told is coming. You feel it when it arrives, but you do not fall over. I held Declan's hands, and I watched my mother stand in the front pew with her chin level and her shoulders back. I watched Petra begin to clap in the 3rd row. I watched the chapel freeze around me. And I held Declan's hands, and I waited for what I knew, without knowing the specifics, was coming next. He pressed play.
Iris's voice came through the chapel speakers, the same voice that had just been addressing the room from the front pew, now coming from above and around and from every direction at once, as sound systems in stone buildings do. There is a specific quality to hearing a voice played back in the same room where the person is standing. It creates a doubling that is difficult to process, a collision between the person in front of you and the person in the recording that makes both versions more real and more visible simultaneously. Iris heard her own voice filling the chapel she was standing in. She heard herself saying, to the man she was currently accusing her daughter of deceiving, exactly what she was saying now. In a coffee shop, a week ago. Carefully, fluently, at length. The chapel listened. I watched Iris's face while the recording played. I want to describe this as accurately as I can, because it is the detail people ask about most when I tell this story. And I think accuracy matters more than drama here. Her face did not collapse. She is not a person whose face collapses. What happened was subtler and, in its subtlety, more complete. The specific quality of certainty that had been in her face since she stood up, the prepared confidence of a person executing a plan they have rehearsed, began, over the 17 minutes of the recording, to leave. The way light leaves a room at the end of the day, not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily and entirely. By the time the recording ended, she was standing in the front pew without the thing that had made her stand up. She was standing, but she was not there anymore in the way she had been. Bernard, beside her, had sat down at some point during the recording. I had not watched him closely enough to mark the exact moment. He was simply, at some point, no longer standing. He was in the pew with his hands in his lap and the expression of a man who has just heard himself confirm something in his own voice and is understanding what that means. Petra's hands had stopped clapping within the first minute of the recording. She sat in the third row with her hands in her lap and her face pointed at the middle distance, not at Iris, not at me, not at anything specific. The expression of someone waiting for the current thing to end before they decide what the next thing is. When the recording finished, the chapel was quiet. Not the stunned quiet of before the recording, a different quiet. The quiet of a room that has just processed something and has not yet arrived at the other side of the processing. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds. 5 seconds is a very long time when 300 people are all inside it together. Then Declan looked at my mother. He said, with a composure that I understood came not from coldness, but from the sadness he had described to me later, "You have said enough." That is all he said. 3 words. And the specific quality of stillness in those 3 words, the complete absence of anger, the presence instead of something more final, was the last sound the situation required. Iris did not speak again. I want to ask you something about those 5 seconds of silence, about what 300 people were doing inside them. Because I have thought about this a great deal since the wedding, about what it means for a room full of people to hear the same thing simultaneously and rearrange their understanding of something they thought they already knew. Some of those 300 people had received Iris's version of me at various points over various years. Some of them had the low-level doubt about my accounts of things running as background noise in how they heard me. And in 5 seconds of silence after a 17-minute recording, all of that was being revised. Have you ever been in a room where you felt the collective revision happening? Where you could almost hear people updating? I was standing at an altar and I felt it like weather. The silence broke from an unexpected direction. My father's sister Claudette, a woman in her mid-60s who had sat 4 rows back with the specific posture of someone bracing for something she had suspected was coming, said something that was not quite directed at anyone and audible to everyone. She said, "So it is true. She has been doing this the whole time." She said it not with triumph and not with fury, but with the particular tone of someone who has been carrying a private suspicion for a long time
and has just been given the validation they were not sure they would ever receive. Several things happened simultaneously in the minute after Claudette spoke. The murmur that had been building under the silence became audible, the sound of a large room redistributing its understanding of a situation. I could not hear individual words from where I stood. I could hear the texture of it, the specific sound of people turning to each other with something to say that they had not previously had room to say. Iris moved toward the side aisle. She did not speak. She gathered her bag from the pew with the careful movements of someone performing composure for the benefit of whatever audience is still watching. And she walked toward the side door of the chapel with her chin level and her shoulders in the position they had been in when she stood up. It was the most Iris thing I have ever watched her do, maintaining the form of her performance even as the performance itself had become impossible. Bernard followed her, slightly behind, the way he always follows. Petra left too. She did not follow Iris and Bernard. She went out through the main doors at the back of the chapel, alone, with the quick, decisive movement of someone who has calculated the fastest exit and is taking it. I watched her go. I had known she would. I had decided before the morning that if Petra left, I would not call after her. That the decision was hers and the consequence was hers, and I would hold them both without trying to manage them. She reached the door and pushed it open and was gone. The minister cleared his throat. He looked at me with the expression of someone who has navigated 30 years of human difficulty inside this building and is drawing on all of it right now. He said, with a quietness and a directness that I have thought about many times since, "Shall we continue?" I looked at Declan. He was looking at me. He had been looking at me since he pressed play, not at Iris, not at the room, not at the recording playing through the speakers. At me. The way he always looks at me when something is happening, like I am the most important thing in the room and everything else is context. I said, "Yes, please." The minister nodded. He opened his order of service. The string quartet, who had remained entirely motionless throughout everything, 4 musicians frozen in the specific professional stillness of people who understand that their role in this moment is to not have a role, looked at each other and made the small adjustments of people ready to play again. We finished our vows. I had written them on a Tuesday night in February, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold beside me. They were exactly what I had written. Nothing that happened in the preceding 20 minutes had changed a word of them. I said them to Declan in the amber October light of a stone chapel with 290-something people watching, and my voice was steady, and I meant every word more fully than I had when I wrote them, because now I knew what they were made of in a way I had not entirely known before. The reception was imperfect and emotionally complicated, and more genuinely joyful than any version of the day I had imagined. The imperfection and the complication were exactly what made the joy real, the specific joy that comes after something difficult has been survived, and the surviving of it has made everyone present more awake, more grateful, more completely themselves than they had been before the difficult thing happened. We danced. We ate. People said things to me that they had perhaps been waiting to say for years, now that the room that had previously made those things unsayable had been cleared. The weeks after the wedding arranged themselves in the way that weeks arrange themselves after a significant event, more quickly than expected, more quietly than expected, with the particular return of ordinary life that makes extraordinary things feel, in retrospect, both more and less real than they did in the moment. Claudette called me 3 days after the wedding. She is not a woman who delays things she has decided to do. She said she had been carrying something for years that she had never found the right way to give me, and that the wedding had made the giving finally possible. She told me that she had never believed Iris's version of the events when I was 19, that she had her own reasons for this, which she was not entirely ready to share, but which she wanted me to know existed. That she had chosen the path of not getting involved,
which she had told herself was neutrality, and which she now understood had not been neutrality at all. She said, "I am sorry. Not for what I said in the chapel, that I would say again. I am sorry for the 12 years of not saying it." I said, "I understand." And I meant it. Not as forgiveness. Forgiveness is its own process and operates on its own timeline and cannot be rushed for anyone's comfort. I meant it as a factual statement.
I understand the calculation she had made, the risk she had assessed, the specific cost of involvement in a system controlled by someone like Iris. I understood it because I had watched it operate my entire life. Understanding it and forgiving it were two different things, and I was working on both in their own time. Other relatives called or messaged over the following weeks. The responses were varied, some warm and apologetic, some more cautious, one or two so carefully worded as to constitute non-responses. This is what I have come to understand about events like the one in the chapel. They do not change everyone. They change the possible. They open a door that had previously been shut, and some people walk through it, and some people look at it and close it again, because the room on the other side is unfamiliar. I had made my peace with both of those outcomes before the wedding. I had prepared for the chapel the way Declan had suggested we prepare, not for a specific result, but for the truth to be present in the room. What the room did with it was not ours to control. Iris did not contact me. For months. Then Bernard sent a letter. It was brief, too careful. Not quite an apology, but a departure from silence that had the shape of a man who has been talking to himself about something for a long time and has finally written some of it down. He said he was sorry for what happened at the wedding. He did not specify what he was sorry for. He did not use the word 19. But he wrote the letter, and the writing of it was, coming from Bernard, something. Petra and I have not spoken. This is the hardest part of the aftermath, and I want to be honest about it, rather than resolve it neatly, because it is not resolved. The sister relationship, which has its own separate, complicated history that is entirely distinct from the Iris dynamic, even as it has been shaped by it, is somewhere I have not yet been able to go. Not because I do not want to, because I do not yet know what going there would produce. And I have learned, from many years of entering rooms Iris had already furnished, to wait until I know what I am walking into before I walk in. Petra and I are not finished. I believe this. I do not know what not finished looks like yet. Declan and I have been married for 7 months now. Our life is ordinary in the specific way that makes ordinary feel like the most extraordinary thing. Coffee in the morning, the particular rhythm of two people whose days have learned each other's shape, the specific humor that develops between two people who have been through something significant together and have emerged from it knowing each other more completely than before. He is the person I chose. He chose me. We chose each other in a stone chapel with 300 witnesses and a recording playing through the sound system, and we will keep choosing each other in the ordinary, daily way that is the actual substance of marriage. Iris appeared at our door 4 months after the wedding. On a Wednesday afternoon, alone, without Bernard. I did not know she was coming. There was no call, no message, no preceding arrangement. I opened the door, and she was there, in her good coat, without her chin level in the way it had been in the chapel, without her shoulders in the prepared position. She stood on the step, and she looked at me, and she did not speak. I understood, in that standing and that silence, that she did not have a speech ready, that she had come without a performance because for once she did not know what the performance should be. It was the most honestly I had ever seen her stand. I said, "I am not ready. Come back when I am." She nodded.
She turned and walked back to her car. She did not look back. I closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment. I was not triumphant. I was not forgiving. I was something more honest than either of those things. I was present in the complicated middle of something that does not have a clean ending yet, holding both the history and the possibility at the same time, knowing that the work of this relationship, if it is going to be anything, will take longer than a doorstep visit and will require more from both of us than we have yet managed to give. And here is the last question I want to leave with you. When someone has spent years authoring a story about you, a story you did not write, did not consent to, and have been living inside without enough space to correct, what does it feel like when the story is finally told in the wrong room? When the audience it was designed for hears it in the same breath as they hear what the author actually said in private? I can tell you what it felt like from the altar. It felt like standing in a chapel with my husband's hands in mine, while the truth filled a room that had been waiting for it. It felt like the specific relief of a thing that has been held too tightly for too long, finally being set down in public. It did not feel like victory. It felt like air.
My name is Ren. My mother stood up at my wedding and called me a liar in front of 300 people. My sister started clapping, and my husband reached into his jacket pocket and pressed play. And the truth, which had been prepared carefully and patiently by a man who had decided that I deserved to be believed, filled every corner of a stone chapel that had been holding difficult human moments for 120 years. It was ready for this one, too. If you are the person whose story has been told by someone else for longer than you can remember, if the version of you that exists in certain rooms was authored without your consent and in your absence, I want you to hear this. You do not always have to be the one who corrects it. Sometimes the person who believes you most completely is also the person who knows how to put the truth in a room in a way that sticks. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let yourself be believed by someone, completely, and trust what they do with that belief. Declan believed me, and then he pressed play, and that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.